I walked away from her failure verdict, exposed Ruth's calm betrayal, reclaimed my dignity, filed for divorce, and finally won back my freedom. "You're a failure. A man who never became anything." She said it with the same tone she'd used to remind me we were out of milk, flat, dismissive, like a fact she'd known for years but had only now decided was worth stating aloud. Our daughter blinked once but kept chewing. Our son shifted in his seat but didn't look up from his plate. The mashed potatoes might as well have been concrete. Even the dog, always hopeful for scraps, slunk off into the hallway like he knew something had cracked open in the house. I didn't say a word. I reached for my napkin, wiped my hands, folded it with an absurd kind of care, and stood up. I walked past her, past the casserole dish still steaming, into the hall closet. There was dust on the duffel bag. I hadn't touched it since my brother's fishing trip in 2009. I shook it once, felt its old weight return to my hand, and started packing. Not clothes, not toothbrushes, not essentials, just the few things that mattered. My sketch pad from the years before the kids, a fountain pen I'd inherited from my dad, and a photo Ruth had taken of me in 1993, laughing so hard my sunglasses slipped off. Marcia had always hated that photo, said it made me look unserious. Funny how that's the one I kept. Her voice echoed down the hall, dripping with smugness. "Oh, please. Like you've got somewhere to go." Still, I didn't speak. I just zipped the bag. Slow, mechanical, final. The sound was sharper than her voice. My shoes were by the radiator. I slid them on like a man going to work, grabbed my keys, and opened the front door. "Seriously, Glenn," she called out behind me. "What? Are you just going to walk away like a coward?" The wind outside wasn't cold, but it carried the kind of bite you feel behind your ribs. I stepped out anyway. I didn't slam the door. I just let it close behind me like the soft click of a vault sealing shut. No bags packed for guilt, no suitcases filled with second chances. She'd pulled the pin. I just walked away from the grenade. The truth is, she'd been practicing that line for weeks, maybe months. I'd seen it brewing in the way she stopped touching my arm when she passed, how she started calling me him when she talked to her sister on speakerphone, like I was already a memory in progress. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was the inconvenient furniture she didn't know how to move. And maybe I had stayed too long. For the kids, for the routine, for the delusion that one day she'd look at me the way she used to, like I was a man worth something. But not anymore. Because the silence that followed her words said everything the kids didn't. They weren't shocked. They weren't even uncomfortable. They were numb, conditioned, like this was just another Thursday dinner where Mom said something sharp and Dad swallowed it whole. Except this time I didn't. I walked 3 blocks to the old bench near Maple and 7th. I sat down, pulled out that photo Ruth had taken, and held it up to the streetlight. The smile on my face, young, wild, unfiltered, looked like a stranger, but something about it still burned in my chest. There was a bar across the street with one of those neon signs that buzzed every time the door opened. I didn't go in. I just sat there watching strangers come and go and let the weight in my chest settle into something solid. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. Let her think I was bluffing. Let her think I'd come crawling back in a day or two, tail between my legs, begging for re-entry into a life where my worth was measured by how quiet I stayed. She thought she ended something at that table. She had no idea she just set something on fire. Marcia poured herself a second glass of Pinot and dropped into the leather recliner like she was claiming a throne. One leg draped over the armrest, phone to her ear, wine glass swaying just above the carpet. "Yes, I swear to God, Sharon." He just stood up and left like some moody teenager with a poetry journal. Pause. Laughter. The kind of brittle laugh that masks something she hadn't yet named. No, he didn't yell. Didn't throw a tantrum. Just packed that old fishing bag, remember that ugly green one? And walked out like I'm supposed to chase him or something. She said it like a joke, but the punchline never landed. The silence after her laugh was longer than it should have been. She hung up a few minutes later, poured another inch of wine, and stood at the patio door, watching the empty driveway. Glenn's car was gone. The porch light flickered once and died. The only sound in the house was the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional creak from upstairs. 2 kids who hadn't said a word after dinner. No where's Dad, no what just happened. They just disappeared into their rooms like ghosts clocking out of a long shift. She checked her phone again. No missed calls, no texts, no long-winded messages filled with apologies or excuses. Just a dark screen and a faint reflection of her own face staring back. By midnight, the bravado started to slip. The TV was still on, some late-night talk show she wasn't listening to. but she kept glancing at the front door like it owed her a performance. One last dramatic return, a grovel, an argument, something. Instead, silence. At 12:17 a.m., she called him. No answer. She left a message, something breezy like, "Hope you're not sleeping in your car, Glenn. It's 42 degrees out, but hey, live your truth." She regretted the tone before she even ended the call. By 1 a.m., she tried again. Straight to voicemail. She slept on the couch, or tried to. Her neck cramped and her arm kept falling asleep. She didn't want to admit it, but the house felt off, like someone had ripped out a foundation beam and left everything sagging. At 7:06 a.m., she gave up and shuffled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and sour. The kids were still asleep. She brewed coffee, trying to shake off the headache that had bloomed behind her eyes. The kettle hissed, the toaster popped, and for a second she convinced herself the world was still spinning normally. Then she walked to the window, and everything stopped. Across the street at the corner cafe, Glenn sat at a small table under a striped awning, hair combed, wearing that gray jacket she once said made him look like a history professor before she told him to throw it out. He looked comfortable, and he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, nursing a cappuccino and laughing at something he just said, was Ruth. Ruth. Marcia's hands spasmed. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the tile. The sound didn't register. All she could see was Ruth's face, a little older, yes, but still infuriatingly serene. Her blonde hair was shorter now, cut just below the ears, and she wore the same smug calm she used to have before Marcia called her a husband-hunting leech 9 years ago. They hadn't spoken since. And yet here she was, sitting with Glenn like they'd never skipped a beat, like the last decade of tension and silence had never happened. Marcia stood frozen, barefoot on cooling tile, coffee dripping between her toes. She didn't know what stung more, seeing Ruth or seeing Glenn smile, not the tired, filtered one he used to force around her friends. This one was effortless, real, a man freed of something. She grabbed her phone, opened their old thread. "What are you doing with her?" She watched the 3 dots appear, then vanish, then nothing. Left on read. Marcia stared out the window, heart pounding like a distant war drum. She had no script for this, no precedent. He was supposed to be broken, not having coffee, not laughing, and definitely not with her. 9 years ago, Ruth disappeared from Marcia's life, like a book yanked off a shelf mid-sentence. No goodbye, no closure, just one explosive fight in the middle of a backyard barbecue and the ghost of a friendship that never got a funeral. It started, as most implosions do, with a glance. Not a touch, not a confession, just one stupid glance. Marcia had come out with a tray of burgers, saw Ruth tilt her head toward Glenn while he showed her some sketches, blueprints for the house they were renovating. Ruth laughed at something, touched his arm for a second too long, and that was it. Later that night, after the guests had left, the wine had dried up, and the citronella candles were all but smoke, Marcia said, "Don't think I didn't notice the way she looks at you." Glenn blinked, confused. "What? Ruth? She's always got some excuse to be near you, always asking about your stupid projects." He had chuckled then. God help him. "Are you jealous of Ruth?" Wrong answer. By morning, Ruth had received a text that started with, "I don't know what your game is, but it ends now," and ended with a sentence so venomous it still made Marcia flush to remember it. Ruth blocked her number, packed up, and moved out of state. No more book club, no more wine nights, no more endless talking about nothing for hours. A friendship that once felt like sisterhood. Gone. And now here she was, in Glenn's chair at Glenn's cafe, laughing like she belonged. Marcia hadn't moved from the window in 30 minutes. The curtain edge dug into her palm as she gripped it like a lifeline, breath shallow, eyes locked on the two of them. Ruth sipped her coffee like royalty, chin slightly tilted, lips curled into that subtle smirk Marcia remembered too well. Glenn leaned forward, elbows on the table, listening like what she said actually mattered. He never leaned in like that for me. The thought punched its way through Marcia's brain before she could strangle it. She pulled out her phone again. "What are you doing with her?" Sent, delivered. Read, and then nothing. That blue check mark burned like acid. No reply, no typing dots, no explanation. The fact he left her on read was worse than any insult. Worse than if he'd replied with some cryptic jab. Glenn never ignored her, not even in their worst fights. Even when he was fuming, he was always the one who needed to talk it through, calm, rational, boringly decent. But this version of him had her completely off script. Across the street, Ruth reached into her purse and handed him something. A postcard, maybe. Glenn looked down, smiled again. Ruth laughed hard, head thrown back. The kind of laugh that came from deep comfort, not awkward flirtation. The casual intimacy of it made Marcia feel like she'd swallowed nails. She scanned their faces for cracks, signs of manipulation, anything to tell her this wasn't real. But no, the warmth was real, and that terrified her. She stepped away from the curtain, pulse drumming in her ears. Ruth was dangerous in a way Marcia never anticipated, subtle. She never shouted. She never demanded. She simply existed in a way that made people lean toward her. And now, Glenn was leaning. Marcia dropped into the kitchen chair, gripped the edge of the table, and stared at her phone like it owed her an answer. She had burned Ruth to protect her marriage, and now Ruth was the one rebuilding it from the outside, brick by stolen brick. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. The kind where every scrape of a fork against the plate feels like someone scratching a chalkboard in your skull. Marcia had reheated some pasta, tossed a bagged Caesar salad in a bowl, and called the kids down like everything was normal. It wasn't. Emma came first, headphones still around her neck, hair tied back in that lazy half-bun she did when she didn't care to impress. 15, and already smarter than Marcia liked to admit. Logan followed a minute later, phone in hand, barely glancing at the table before sitting. They ate in silence for maybe 3 minutes, long enough for Marcia to almost believe the kids hadn't noticed anything, that Glenn's absence hadn't punctured the air. And then Emma said it like it was just a passing weather report. Dad looked happy today. The fork slipped from Marcia's hand and clattered against the plate. You saw him? She asked too quickly. Emma shrugged. Yeah. After school, me and Abby stopped for smoothies. He was across the street at that new cafe. Marcia tried to play casual, but her throat went dry. Was he alone? Another shrug. No. He was with Aunt Ruth. That name hit the table like a hammer. Marcia blinked. Ruth? Emma didn't even look up. Yeah, that's what you always called her, right? Aunt Ruth. She's not your aunt, Marcia snapped. Too loud, too fast. She caught herself. I mean, she hasn't been around for a long time. Emma finally raised her eyes. She seemed nice. Dad was laughing. Then, like the universe had a sick sense of timing, Logan chimed in without looking up from his phone. He never looked like that when he lived here. The room went still. Marcia stared at him. Excuse me? Logan kept scrolling. I'm just saying, he always looked tired, you know, worn out. Emma pushed her plate forward. Done eating. He didn't even see me, but he looked different, like he'd slept for a change. Marcia's brain scrambled for footing. Well, she said, voice tight, Ruth always liked attention. She probably invited him out to stir things up. She's good at that. Emma gave her a look. The kind that wasn't rebellious, just tired. I thought you said she hated him. You always told us Ruth couldn't stand Dad. Marcia opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The lie was too old to repurpose, too brittle to bend. Emma pushed back her chair and stood. Anyway, I've got homework. She was already halfway to the stairs when she added over her shoulder. They didn't look like people who hated each other. Logan finished chewing, then stood too. Can I stay at Mason's Friday night? Marcia blinked. We'll see. He nodded and walked away. No hug, no thanks, Mom, just gone. Marcia sat alone at the table, half a bowl of salad wilting in front of her. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy with absence. It was crowded. Every word she'd ever fed those kids about Glenn, about Ruth, about who loved whom and who abandoned what, suddenly felt like a fragile old script being rewritten right in front of her. And now they weren't reading from her pages anymore. Marcia didn't knock. She pounded. 4 sharp, angry thuds that made the brass door knocker rattle like a warning bell. Unit 3B, 3rd floor walk-up. The hallway smelled like dust and citrus cleaner, and she'd taken the stairs 2 at a time like a woman on a mission to reclaim her territory. The door creaked open. Ruth, barefoot, calm, hair pinned back in that lazy French twist she used to do when they were friends. No makeup, just soft, unbothered skin, and that maddening expression like she'd expected this exact moment down to the minute. You think this is funny? Marcia hissed, stepping forward like she might barge in without permission. Ruth didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just tilted her head slightly and, to Marcia's disbelief, stepped aside. If you're going to throw a tantrum, at least come inside where the neighbors won't record it. Marcia pushed through the doorway like a storm, then stopped cold. Glenn was sitting cross-legged on the rug, flipping through a crate of vinyls. There was an old Billie Holiday album on top, Lady in Satin, and he was holding it delicately like it meant something. He didn't even look up. "Not now, Marcia," he said, calm, measured, like this was just an interruption during some lazy Sunday routine. "We're busy." The room smelled like lavender and wood polish. A jazz record hummed softly from the corner. There was a tray on the coffee table with 2 mismatched mugs and a slice of lemon cake. Marcia looked around. Books stacked neatly by the fireplace. Soft throws draped over chairs, one of Glenn's old pencil sketches framed on the wall. A place that didn't scream luxury but screamed him. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. "This is where you ran to? Some patchwork tea party with her?" Ruth walked around her slowly, picked up the teapot, and began pouring into one of the mugs. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, voice dripping with a softness that only made the sting sharper. "Or are you hoping for a little more control today?" Marcia clenched her fists. "You think this is about control? You think I give a damn about you?" Glenn finally looked up. His eyes were tired, but not the kind she remembered. This wasn't work-exhausted or family-worn. It was the kind of tired you feel when someone drags you back into a mess you already cleaned up and walked away from. "I told you," he said, setting the record down gently. "I'm not playing this game anymore." Marcia's mouth twitched. "You're really just going to pretend none of this matters? The house, the kids, the years? You made that decision for both of us the night you called me a failure in front of our children," he said, voice low but firm. "You wanted to humiliate me. You did, congratulations. But you don't get to dictate what comes next." Ruth sat on the armrest beside him, not touching him, not gloating, just present. Marcia's eyes darted between them, searching for some crack, some weakness, something she could use. But all she saw was stillness. They weren't rushing to defend themselves. They weren't arguing. They weren't trying to hurt her. They were just living. And that realization gutted her deeper than any insult could have. "You're pathetic," she snapped, voice cracking at the edges. "Both of you." Glenn shrugged. "That's okay. I've been worse." Marcia's breath hitched. She felt the room closing in, the air thick with the one thing she couldn't control. Indifference. Ruth sipped her tea. "You should go, Marcia. This isn't your scene anymore. No yelling, no dramatic slap, no pleading, just quiet rejection. The kind that lasts longer, hurts deeper." As Marcia turned to leave, the door didn't slam behind her. Ruth didn't follow. Glenn didn't watch. They just let her go like someone tossing away the last thread of a story that no longer made sense. Marcia slammed the front door behind her hard enough to rattle the glass. The sound reverberated through the empty house, but there was no one to flinch, no one to glare at her, no one to ask what was wrong. She kicked off her heels, marched to the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. It sloshed over the rim. She didn't care. Her blood felt like it had crystallized, pulsing hot through her temples. That smug little apartment, that smug little teapot, that smug little Ruth. She stormed into the dining room, yanked open her laptop, and dropped into the chair like it owed her answers. She cracked her knuckles once, twice. The screen glowed to life. Search, Ruth Adler. She scrolled through the usual noise, old alumni updates, a couple of LinkedIn mentions. Nothing scandalous, no recent arrests, no tragic bankruptcy, not even a bad Yelp review. She clicked open Facebook. Ruth's profile wasn't private. Of course it wasn't. She always was one of those insufferably open people who pretended their transparency made them virtuous. Marcia scrolled past beach photos, dinner parties, random nature shots with vague captions like collecting light, not things. Then she stopped. A photo posted 4 days ago. Ruth in denim overalls, standing barefoot on a half-painted porch, holding a paint roller in one hand. Behind her, Glenn kneeling on one knee, reaching into a tray of white paint. His sleeves rolled up, sweat visible on his collarbone, face young, not in years but in spirit. He was smiling, candid and unguarded, the same way he used to when they were first married and he'd surprise her with Chinese takeout on rainy days. Before kids, before expectations calcified into resentment. Marcia zoomed in instinctively, as if staring hard enough would make the expression change. The caption was short, almost cruel in its casualness. Turns out the best things come back, when you stop chasing the wrong ones. Her stomach dropped. The room tilted slightly. She had to set the wine glass down before it slipped. She hit the back button, typed again, harder this time. Search, Glenn Hastings plus Ruth Adler. Search Ruth Adler scandal. Search Ruth Adler affair. Search Ruth Adler lies. The pages loaded one after another but gave her nothing. No ammo, no dirt, just smiling faces, overlapping friend groups, a post about Glenn helping organize a community mural downtown. She gritted her teeth and opened Glenn's old LinkedIn. Last updated 2 years ago, still listed as independent architectural consultant. Still that black and white profile picture she hated. She tried his name in Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, nothing, not even a whiff of drama. Just silence and soft reemergence, the quiet kind of re-entry that doesn't announce itself but still lands like a rock through a window. She leaned back in her chair, fingers hovering over the keyboard, suddenly unsure what she was even trying to accomplish. She thought she'd find evidence of Ruth manipulating him, maybe a bitter post from Glenn she could twist. Instead, she found peace. Their peace. And none of it included her. Marcia closed the laptop slowly. The room felt colder. Not winter cold, but hollow, like a house long emptied of its real use. The worst part wasn't the caption. It wasn't even the photo. It was that neither of them were hiding. They didn't need to, because they weren't afraid of her anymore. Control had slipped so silently, so gradually, that she hadn't noticed it was gone until now. And suddenly the house she'd claimed as her fortress felt like a very large, very quiet museum full of exhibits no one visited anymore. She went all out. Roasted chicken, his recipe, though she'd never admit it. Mashed potatoes from scratch, not boxed. And even the old green beans almondine that Logan used to beg for when he was 12. Candles flickered. Tablecloth freshly ironed. The good plates, not the chipped everyday ones. A dinner of false peace. A dinner to yank the reins back. The kids came down slowly, suspiciously, like they'd already smelled something off. Logan sat with his hoodie still on, headphones slung around his neck. Emma scrolled her phone as she chewed a piece of bread, dry, no butter. Marcia plastered on her best mother voice, light, breezy. I thought it would be nice, just the three of us, like old times. No one responded. They just ate. She cleared her throat. So, school going all right? Emma didn't look up. It's midterms. What do you think? Marcia tried again. Logan, didn't you say you were working on a film project? Something with the teacher who always wears the horrible neckties? Mr. Dimmick, he said. Already turned it in. He went back to cutting his chicken. The silence wrapped around her like plastic wrap, tight, sterile, hard to breathe through. She pushed her wine glass aside and leaned in. You know, we don't need your dad to have a nice night. It can still be us, the three of us. That's when Logan set his fork down, not gently, not a slam, just deliberately. Can we invite Dad next time? The air snapped. Marcia blinked. What? Just saying. It's weird pretending he doesn't exist when he literally lives across town. She reached for her wine glass, gripped the stem too hard. No, she said, voice cracking slightly before she smoothed it. Seeing someone toxic isn't healthy for any of us. Silence. No reaction at first. Then Emma looked up slowly, dead in the eye. You mean Ruth? Marcia hesitated. Emma didn't let her finish. I talked to her. When I ran into them, she listened more in one coffee than you did all year. It hit like a blunt object. Fast. Undeniable. I'm your mother, Marcia snapped, louder than she meant. You don't know her. You know me. Emma stood up calmly, pushing her chair back without a scrape. No, Mom. We knew you. We just didn't know it wasn't allowed to talk about it. Logan stood too, not out of defiance, just quiet resignation. I'm not picking sides, he muttered, but you can't act like he vanished. He didn't. You pushed him. The words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded lived in, repeated silently for months, waiting for the valve to crack. Emma grabbed her plate. I'm eating upstairs. Emma, sit down. But she was already at the stairs. Logan lingered for a second, looked at her with something between pity and exhaustion, then followed. Marcia sat frozen, the food untouched on their plates, the candles burning lower. She had set the table like a general preparing for a truce, but found herself alone in a room that didn't recognize her command anymore. The rebellion wasn't loud. It was worse. It was calm, unapologetic, permanent. The envelope was thick, heavy, almost hidden between a credit card offer and a community water report. It stood out immediately, cream-colored with gold-embossed edges. Addressed to Glenn. No return address. Marcia stared at it for a long moment. She shouldn't open it. Legally, morally, she shouldn't. But Glenn hadn't changed his address. And technically it was still her mailbox. She slid it open with the back of a butter knife, careful not to tear. Inside, folded neatly between legal-sized documents, was a handwritten card and a notarized transfer of deed. Her eyes skipped the top line and landed on the signature, Ruth Adler. She scanned back up, jaw tightening. The document was clean, formal, transfer of partial ownership of a property 2 towns over, a modest house on Oak Hill Road. 2 names on the document, Ruth Adler, Glenn Hastings. Not tenants, not leaseholders. Owners. Together, the paper started to tremble between her fingers. She hadn't realized her hand was shaking until the text blurred. Tucked inside the folds was a small square card, heavy cardstock, pale blue, hand-trimmed edges, floral border. She opened it with 2 fingers like it might bite her. Inside, written in Ruth's loopy script, "For everything you gave up, let's start from scratch together. No date, no signature, just that one sentence." Marcia sat down without meaning to. The dining room chair caught her as she dropped into it. The card fluttered to the table. She read the line again, then again. Let's start from scratch together. Not a weekend fling, not a rebound, not some emotional crutch. This was a plan. Ruth wasn't a distraction. She was the plan. And Glenn had agreed. He hadn't just packed a bag. He'd walked towards something, deliberately, with conviction. He wasn't wandering through grief. He was walking into a future she'd never been invited to see. She glanced at the card again. Her own reflection stared back from the glossy finish. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like someone trying to remember how to breathe. All this time she'd framed Ruth as a saboteur, a snake, a threat. But snakes don't leave signed property deeds. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a transfer of everything. A slow, precise extraction of Glenn's life from their house, their family, from her, into something that looked disgustingly whole. Marcia folded the document slowly, but her hands weren't cooperating. They kept trembling. She smoothed the card flat again with her palm, as if pressing hard enough would erase the ink, but it stayed. Permanent. She looked around the room at the stale fruit in the bowl, the dead flowers on the counter, the pile of unopened mail she'd been ignoring for days, and in that silence, a creeping fear threaded through her spine. This wasn't a phase. This was Glenn finally choosing something without her voice in the decision. And what terrified her most wasn't the rejection. It was that he looked happy doing it. She didn't knock this time. Just stood on Ruth's freshly painted porch, fists balled at her sides, lips pressed thin. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the world was already warm. Too warm for the sweater she'd thrown on in a panic. It clung to her skin like shame. A hanging fern brushed against her shoulder as she shifted weight from foot to foot, rehearsing versions of what she might say. Apologies? No, she wasn't sorry. Warnings? Too late. Manipulation? Possibly. The door opened. Ruth in slippers and a pale blue robe. Hair unbrushed, face clean. The kind of undone that still looked put together. Marcia didn't waste time. "I want to talk to Glenn, alone." Ruth held her gaze for a beat. No reaction. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back inside. A moment later, Glenn stepped out. He didn't lean on the doorframe. He didn't cross his arms defensively. No sigh, no emotion at all. Just a slow blink and a level stare. He looked like a man who'd already said everything he needed to say and had no intention of repeating it. Marcia spoke quickly, almost breathless. I ate a minute. That's all, 1 minute. Without her watching from behind the curtains. Glenn glanced over his shoulder briefly, then walked out onto the porch, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He folded his arms, not defensively, just to keep his hands still. Marcia tried to hold his eyes, failed, looked down at her shoes. "We had a life," she said. "Glenn, you can't just erase that." He tilted his head. "Erase? No. But I don't have to carry it anymore." She stepped closer, voice tighter. "You're really going to rewrite everything we built? Throw it away for some fantasy with a woman who ghosted the second things got real?" He exhaled, not a sigh, more like clearing smoke from a room. "I had a life," he said slowly. "You had complaints." Marcia blinked. "What?" "Every day for 20 years I gave everything I had and it was never enough. If I bought groceries, you'd say I forgot the right brand. If I got home late, I was selfish. If I got home early, I was lazy. If I said I was tired, you rolled your eyes. You didn't want a partner, you wanted a project. And when I stopped performing, you labeled me a failure in front of our kids." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. He stepped past her to the top stair, arms still folded, looking out over the quiet street. "You want to talk legacy? That house we lived in, I designed every beam of it. The roof line, the kitchen flow, the east-facing windows. You picked out drapes. That was your contribution. Complaints and drapes. Glenn—" "No," he said, holding up a hand. "You don't get to rewrite now. This porch, I didn't build it, but I helped repaint it last weekend. It was 93 degrees. Ruth brought me lemonade and didn't ask me to be more than I was." Marcia took a slow step forward. "She's not me. She doesn't know what you're like after 2 decades. When the shine fades, when the patience wears thin. She doesn't know your silences, or your stupid rituals. She's not ready for the real you." Glenn turned to face her again, calm, still, like a man who had finally built a boundary he had no intention of moving. "You're right," he said. "She's not you. A beat. And that's exactly why I stayed." For a moment it looked like she might cry. Instead she scoffed. "You think this little fantasy will last?" He shrugged. "I think anything would outlast resentment and a weekly performance review." The door opened behind them. Ruth stood there holding a mug. "Everything okay?" Glenn nodded once. "Yeah, we're done." He turned back to Marcia, gave her a slow, deliberate nod, then walked inside without another word. Marcia stood on the porch, stunned. The door didn't slam shut behind him. It closed softly, intentionally. The kind of final that doesn't beg for a return visit. And for the first time she felt it. Not just the loss, but the powerlessness. She hadn't lost a man. She'd been replaced by peace. Saturday, 10:32 a.m. Same cafe, same stupid striped awning, the same table Glenn had sat at the first morning after he walked out. Ruth across from him, sipping cappuccino like she hadn't detonated Marcia's entire reality with one smile. But this time there was something different. The way he leaned back in the chair, the way his hand rested on the table, not clenched, not guarded, but open, relaxed. And then there was the glint, a thin silver band on his left hand that caught the light just right, flashing like a warning beacon through the windshield of Marcia's parked SUV. She hadn't planned to be there. Or maybe she had. She told herself she was going to the pharmacy, told herself it was coincidence, but the coffee in her cup was from a drive-through 20 minutes away. Untouched, now cold. She sat in the driver's seat, hands locked around the steering wheel even though the car was in park. She hadn't blinked in minutes. Her eyes stung. Glenn reached forward and touched Ruth's hand across the table. Marcia nearly threw up. Her phone buzzed in the center console. She didn't move for it at first. It buzzed again, then again. Finally, she swiped it open. "Logan." She stared at the screen a second, then answered. "Hey." His voice was casual, almost too casual. "Hey, Mom, just talked to Dad." Her stomach tightened. "And?" "He said you can have the house. Full transfer. He's moving in with Ruth full-time." A pause. Said it was already signed over. Papers should be coming soon, but he wanted me to tell you. "Yeah, it's yours." The word yours tasted like metal. "And, Logan hesitated. "Ruth invited us to the wedding. It's small, just a backyard thing. But Emma and I are going to go." Marcia's throat closed. "You said yes?" There was a pause. Not guilty, just quiet. "She makes him happy, Mom. That's not a crime." He hung up before she could respond. Across the street, Ruth leaned in and whispered something. Glenn laughed, soft, real, familiar. Marcia's eyes burned. This wasn't supposed to be how it ended. Glenn was supposed to spiral, age overnight, crumble without her, become some withered husk staring out windows wondering where it all went wrong. Instead, he rebuilt. Not with a 20-year-old rebound or a new car or a crisis beard. He rebuilt with Ruth, the one woman Marcia had cut out, cornered, discarded, and swore she buried forever. The one woman who never shouted back. The one woman she could never fully understand or control. Now, through a sheet of glass and 10 years of bitter distance, she watched them sip coffee and smile like two people who'd survived a war she thought she'd already won. The ring on his finger caught the light again. Marcia stared through the windshield. Tears welled but didn't fall. Her mascara held. Her grip on the wheel did not. She thought she broke him. But Glenn wasn't broken. He was free,